We're in a series right now called Unreasonable Church, looking at how the church started and what that can teach us about what our church can look like here in Denver in 2025. So let's talk about unreasonable generosity. First, let's just be honest for a second. Nothing makes people squirm faster in church than when money comes up. Why is that? It's not because money is evil. Many people think the Bible teaches that money is the root of all evil. You've probably heard that quote before. But it actually says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Scripture never says money in and of itself is inherently evil. But what makes it so magnetic that it often becomes something that we pursue and desire, something that we can come to love, and therefore can make it difficult to talk about? It's because money's intimate. It represents our choices and our safety and our future. It's wrapped up in our dreams and our fears. When someone talks about money, it can feel like they're talking about your value or your worth or even just your ability to survive. I'll be honest with you, I've gotten a lot more comfortable over the 15 years that I've been doing this, but I still don't love talking about money as a pastor. I've wrestled with scarcity. I've been the person double-checking my accounts before Venmoing a friend back. I've been generous at times. I've been greedy at others. So please hear me when I say what follows is not coming from a person who's arrived. It's coming from someone in process. I'm someone who is slowly learning that the tightest grip doesn't usually lead to the safest life. And in fact, it often leads to the smallest one. So as we move forward tonight, I want to be clear, this is not about shame or guilt trips. It's about being part of this movement called the church. So let's start with this question tonight. What even is mine? In the early church, there's this stunning moment in Acts 4 that reads like something out of a utopian novel. And it says this: the whole congregation of believers was united as one heart, one mind. They didn't even claim ownership of their own possessions. No one said, "That's mine, you can't have it." They shared everything. The apostles gave powerful witness to the resurrection of the Master Jesus, and grace was on all of them. And so it turned out that not a person among them was needy. Those who owned fields or houses sold them and brought the price of the sale to the apostles and made an offering of it. And the apostles then distributed it according to each person's need. Let's just pause there for a second. From childhood, we're trained in the religion of mine. Watch a toddler with a toy. What is their favorite word? Mine. And we don't really grow out of that. We just get better at disguising it. It becomes a parking spot or a streaming account or a line in a will. Mine isn't always about money or material possession. Sometimes it's about time or energy. It's that instinct that says, I don't have space for that. Or I've got to protect my margin. Which is part of why we talk about all our resources, relationships, time, possessions, and money in our weekly generosity prayer at the end of every Tuesday. At the same time, boundaries are good, right? It's important to be healthy and not constantly overextending ourselves towards burnout and debt. But there's a difference between healthy boundaries and self-protective hoarding. The early church wasn't reckless, but they weren't guarded. They moved through the world with open hands, and that posture shifted everything. No one said, "That's mine." No one guarded their stuff. No one hoarded. No one pulled the "I worked hard for this" card. They sold whatever they had and distributed the funds to whoever needed them so that no one was in need among them. That's not just generous, that's deeply unreasonable. Because as I said, from the time we're young, we're taught what's mine and what's yours, and we label it and we guard it and we protect it. And yet there's this group of early Jesus followers living like everything they had was already on loan from God, given to them not to possess, but to share. I think it's really important to keep in mind, they weren't required to do this. No one was forced. There's no divine tax code. It was their natural response to what God was up to. And frankly, it wouldn't be generosity if it wasn't a choice that they freely made. But they did make that uncoerced choice. They chose to live open-handedly. I think at the root of all this is trust. Do I trust that if I live open-handedly, I'll still be okay? Do I trust that God sees what I need? that others might actually show up for me too? Am I too prideful to accept others showing up for me? Generosity isn't just about giving, it's about trusting that giving and receiving won't ruin you, and that grace can flow in both directions. There's this other moment that I want to highlight in 2 Corinthians 8, where Paul is writing to the church in Corinth about generosity. And at this point in history, the persecution of Christians in Jerusalem by the Jewish authorities has really ramped up. The church in Jerusalem is decimated, and people are really struggling. And Paul writes about this beautiful moment where these Macedonian churches, who are also struggling, give generously to the Christians in Jerusalem, people they don't even know. Here's what it says. Now, friends, I want to report on the surprising and generous ways in which God is working in the churches in Macedonia. Fierce troubles came down on the people of those churches, pushing them to the very limit. The trial exposed their true colors. They were incredibly happy, though desperately poor. The pressure triggered something totally unexpected, an outpouring of pure and generous gifts. I was there and saw it for myself. They gave offerings of whatever they could, far more than they could afford. That phrase, incredibly happy though desperately poor, should stop us in our tracks. Our culture does not link happiness and poverty. I don't know of any culture that does. We expect joy to follow comfort and security and upward mobility. But here are people with almost nothing, smiling and laughing and giving. That's resurrection logic. That's what grace does. It unhooks our peace from our possessions. These are people going through hardship. They're not giving out of excess. They're giving out of joy. That makes no financial sense. But that's kind of the point. They weren't giving to impress anyone. They weren't giving to secure blessings. They were giving because something had shifted deep in them. Grace had restructured their internal economy. This wasn't generosity for generosity's sake. It was a direct response to grace. The Macedonians had tasted something in Jesus that made them value or reevaluate what was worth holding on to. They weren't guilted into it. They were lit up from within. They were living proof that grace doesn't just change your beliefs, it changes your habits. When was the last time you felt grace shift something inside of you? When did you last feel a nudge to give to someone or something and actually acted on it? We all have an internal economy, one that determines what we value and what we protect and what we're willing to release. Grace doesn't bulldoze that economy. It transforms it slowly, one open-handed act at a time. Imagine if someone got laid off and they took a job that had half the pay and then increased their financial generosity. That's the kind of thing that we would call reckless and irresponsible. And yet it's what Paul celebrates, because to him it's not foolish, it's faithful. It's what happens when grace rewrites your sense of what truly matters and all the ways that you've been blessed to be a blessing to others. Again, this isn't a command given or offered as a prescription that you have to follow. But when you realize that everything you have is a gift, you start holding it differently. It's not that money doesn't matter, it does, but it doesn't own you anymore. And when you're no longer owned by it, you can do unreasonable things with it. So let's zoom out for a second. We live in a culture that runs on scarcity logic. The whole thing is built on the idea that you don't have enough. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough energy, not enough status or likes or followers or influence. And because of that, we hold tightly. We protect what's ours. We plan and save and optimize. And to be clear, planning and budgeting aren't bad things. Being wise with your money, being responsible stewards of what we've been given is really, really important. But at some point, that wisdom can cross over into anxiety and into stinginess, into spiritual gridlock where nothing can move forward because we're holding too tightly to what we think is ours. The early church had a different economy than scarcity, the economy of enough. If someone had 2 coats, they shared. If someone needed food, the group made sure they ate. If someone was in debt, someone else sold something to cover it. I know some of you have heard the line, they shared everything, or they distributed according to those who had need, and immediately start wondering if this is veering into a political statement. But hear me, the church was not driven by policy. They were driven by proximity and presence and love. Again, they weren't required or forced to be generous by each other. They freely lived it, not because someone made them, but because they saw Jesus do it first. It wasn't socialism, it wasn't capitalism, it was resurrection economics. And it only worked because of proximity. They knew each other. They knew each other's needs. They shared tables. They practiced mutual care, not just mutual ideology. Mutuality. That's something that's only possible when people are responding to grace and looking out for one another and not being driven by scarcity logic. Scarcity logic is loud, but it's not the only myth that we've absorbed. There's also the myth of self-sufficiency. I fall prey to this all the time. The idea that if you just hustle hard enough, if you budget wisely enough, you won't need anyone. That's not wisdom or resilience, it's just fear in disguise. Scarcity tells us that there's not enough. Self-sufficiency tells us that we shouldn't need anyone anyway. And together they trap us in isolation. But the early church didn't live that way. They knew the truth. We need each other. Not just emotionally, but economically and relationally and spiritually. So maybe the most generous thing you can do isn't give more money. Maybe it's sharing your time. Maybe it's letting someone borrow your car. Maybe it's offering to babysit. Maybe it's paying attention to the people around you until their needs start to become visible to you. In your workplace, scarcity logic can look like hoarding credit or guarding your schedule or refusing to mentor the younger person on your team because it's not your job. But the economy of enough invites something different from us. What if generosity looked like making someone else's job easier? Or teaching what you know without being territorial about it? That's absolutely still generosity, and it matters. The economy of God doesn't begin with how much do I have to give. It begins with what do I have that someone else might need. Let me tell you a quick story. This is Christmas Eve 2015. I'm driving from Westminster to our service, which was in Inglewood at the time. And as I'm driving on I-25, my car starts breaking down. I drove a stick at the time because I thought they were really cool. I actually still think that, and I miss it every day. But my clutch burned up while I was driving. So basically, unless I was in one of the highest gears, when I pushed on the pedal, nothing happened. Which is fine when you're on the highway, because you can go in those highest gears. But it's a big problem as soon as you're at a light and have to stop or start going from nothing. Somehow, as soon as I got off the highway, I made it through like 8 stoplights in a row that were all green. Never had that kind of luck with stoplights. But thank goodness, because I'm literally just coasting. And by the time I turned into our parking lot, my car was completely dead. It never moved again on its own after that. That's stressful enough to have happen on Christmas Eve when I'm headed to do my job. But this was a season where money was really tight for us. And we found out because Chevy in their infinite wisdom made it so that it was like 12 hours of labor just to get to the clutch. Replacing it was going to cost more than the car was worth. And it was only 6 years old, which is always super fun to find out. So a week or so goes by and I get a letter in the mail. And I thought it was just your standard Christmas card where people show you pictures of their family and their babies and give you an update on the year. And I really love getting those cards. They're really fun. But this card also had $600 in it. And I don't know about your life, but I don't normally open letters with $600 in them. I hadn't before that, and I haven't since then. So when I opened it, I didn't really understand what I was looking at. I thought it had to have been a mistake. But along with the money, there's this note from this family at T&L that said, "We heard about your car and we want you to have this. And just so you know, this isn't putting us out or anything, because every month we take a little bit of money and we save it away. And at the end of the year, we give it to someone in need. And this year, we're giving it to you and Michaela. We don't need you to thank us. In fact, while we're happy to talk about it with you, we will never bring this up to you. It is purely God's gift to you through us. And I stood in my kitchen and cried. Not really because of the money. It was incredibly kind and appreciated, but it was far, far less than the repair of my car was going to cost. But that wasn't the point. It wrecked me because someone saw my need and decided to help address it. Not only that, this was just something that they did. Like, they saved throughout the year just to be generous at the end of the year. That's unreasonable generosity. And it changed me. Not financially, but spiritually. It restructured something in me. And so Michaela and I copied that family's same idea, and we try to save money throughout the year to give to others in need. It's never been a ginormous amount, and we haven't been able to do it every year, but it's important. I'm not sharing that story to tell you about how great we are. It's a story about how you can change people's lives through simple acts of generosity. Our lives were changed because this family was intentionally generous with their money. Because when someone loves you like that, seeing what you need without you going to them at all, with no strings attached, you start to believe that maybe that's what God's like too. And you want to be a part of that. That's exactly what happened with the early church. Their radical generosity towards one another was unignorable and so attractive. It didn't just help the church survive the hardest times, it helped it grow. Sociologist Rodney Stark writes, in the midst of the decay of the great cities of the Roman Empire, Christianity offered not only hope, but effective charity. Christians supported one another in time of need, and their generosity extended beyond the bounds of family and congregation. Their generosity wasn't a branding tool. It wasn't performative. It was simply who they were. A people shaped by grace, choosing to live open-handedly in a world clenched by fear. So let's translate all of this into our actual lives. Because we're not a first century group of believers still selling land and cooking communal meals every day. We live in Denver in 2025. We've got jobs and rent and medical bills and student loans and Chick-fil-A. So what does unreasonable generosity look like here and now? Let's get practical. Unreasonable generosity might look like paying for someone's groceries without them knowing. Canceling a subscription to help fund someone else's counseling. Buying a meal for the person in your office that everyone else avoids. Increasing your giving not because someone asked, but because you felt stirred to. Not just giving money, but giving attention or energy or time. And again, this isn't a campaign. This is a posture. It's a lifestyle. It's a habit of asking, how can I be a blessing today? Every day asking, how can I be a blessing today? You may not be able to give $600 to someone struggling, but maybe you can give them 15 minutes to just listen. Maybe you can offer a ride. Maybe you can cook a meal. Maybe you can give just enough to remind someone else they're not alone. And maybe in doing so, you'll start to believe that it's true for you too. Let's not forget, most of your life does not happen in this room. It happens in meetings and Slack threads and traffic and meal prep. So what does this look like at your job, in your work? If you're a teacher, generosity might look like staying a few extra minutes to check in on a student that you're worried about. If you're in tech, it might be using your skills to help a nonprofit or a friend who's trying to start something. If you're in retail or service, it might be the way you speak gently to someone who's not being kind to you, if you can even imagine that happening. If you're a parent, maybe it's learning how to forgive yourself and how you model forgiveness for your kids. This kind of generosity isn't just about money, it's about your presence and your posture and your heart. You are never more like Jesus than when you give with no expectations in return. And that applies just as much to how you show up on Monday mornings as it does to how you show up here on Tuesday nights. So let me leave you with this. The church has always been unreasonable. We believe in resurrection. We welcome people who don't believe what we believe. We sit next to people that we might not ever choose to sit next to anywhere else. We share what we have, even when it costs us. We believe love is stronger than fear, grace is stronger than shame, and generosity is stronger than scarcity. And that will never make sense in a culture dominated by scarcity logic. Scarcity says protect what's yours. Jesus says give what you can. Scarcity says climb the ladder. Jesus says kneel down and wash feet. Scarcity says keep score. Jesus says forgive others 70 times 7. So this week, I want you to reflect on a few questions about generosity. The first is, where have I been holding too tightly to what I'm blessed with? The second is, who around me has a need that I've been too distracted to notice? And then finally, who's been unreasonably generous with me, and how can I pass that on? And then do one thing, one small, meaningful, unreasonable thing. It doesn't have to make financial sense. I'm not telling you to go out and spend all your money on something that you shouldn't. I'm saying be generous with what you have. It doesn't have to make financial sense. It just has to make love visible. That's what the early church did. That's the kind of church I still want to be a part of. And it's the kind of church that we're continuing to grow into together. Not a brand, not a campaign, but a community where resurrection life is rooted in our wallets and our homes and our hearts. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for your unbelievable generosity towards us. Thank you that you don't wait for us to get our act together, but you move toward us first. God, it is scary to trust that we don't have to take care of ourselves, and that's not all up to us. God, may each of us be willing to slowly, more and more, let go of what you've given us to bless the people in our lives. God, may we be looking for ways to reflect your love in the world with everything that you've given us. And help us to really know and believe that everything we have is a gift. We love you, God. It's in your name we pray. Amen.